Let's talk about one of the biggest and, frankly, most controversial stories in the history of science. It's a story about a discovery that changed everything, a secret clue, and a brilliant scientist who was almost completely written out of the narrative. So picture this. It's February 28th, 1953. Two scientists, James Watson and Francis Crick, burst into a pub in Cambridge, England, and they announced to everyone that they found the secret of life. And they had. They figured out the structure of DNA. It was a monumental achievement, and for that, they'd go on to win the Nobel Prize.
But, that's not the whole story. Not even close. The discovery that basically launched modern biology wasn't just the work of these two men. There was a secret ingredient, a piece of the puzzle that came from somewhere else entirely.
And here's the kicker. The person who provided that crucial clue had absolutely no idea her work was even being used. That person was Rosalind Franklin, and this is the story of her essential and, for way too long, uncredited role in it all.
So who was this incredible scientist? To really get her story, you have to understand the world she was navigating, a world that wasn't exactly welcoming.
Rosalind Franklin was a force of nature. She knew she was going to be a scientist when she was just 12 years old. She fought her way into Cambridge at a time when they had a quota to keep the number of women at just 10% of the male student body. Get this, she did her physical chemistry studies during the London Blitz of World War II, and her specialty? It was a really complex, really powerful technique called X-ray crystallography.
And it was this expertise that led her to capture an image that would, and I'm not exaggerating here, change the world. It's known today simply as Photograph 51.
Okay, so what in the world is X-ray crystallography? It sounds super complicated, but the basic idea is kind of like this. If you shoot X-rays at a crystal, they bounce off or diffract in these really specific patterns. And if you can capture those patterns on film, you can do the math and work backward to figure out the 3D structure of the thing you shot the X-rays at.
Now, you have to appreciate just how mind-bogglingly difficult this was. DNA isn't some nice, neat crystal. Franklin and her PhD student, Raymond Gosling, had to isolate a single strand as thin as a human hair, line it up perfectly, and then blast it with X-rays for 100 hours straight, just to get one single image. The work was absolutely painstaking.
And this was it. This was the result. Photograph 51. Now, to you and me, it might not look like much, right? Kind of blurry. But to a scientist trying to figure out the shape of DNA, that big, clear X in the middle was like a bolt of lightning. It was the clearest proof anyone had ever seen that DNA was a helix, shaped like a spiral staircase. This was the clue.
But see, Franklin was a methodical scientist. She was still doing her calculations, analyzing the data. She wasn't ready to publish a thing. So how on earth did this revolutionary, unpublished image get from her lab into the hands of her direct competitors?
Well, let's trace the path. First, Franklin's colleague, Maurice Wilkins, a man she had a pretty tense relationship with, showed Photograph 51 to his buddy, James Watson. And this is the crucial part. He did it without her knowledge, without her permission. Then Wilkins gave Watson the exact dimensions from the photo. And to top it all off, another colleague gave Watson and Crick a confidential internal report that had all of Franklin's unpublished calculations. They didn't just have her picture anymore, they had her data too. And you don't have to guess how big of a deal this was. Watson's own words tell the whole story. The moment he saw that X shape, he knew. It was his eureka moment. The race was on, and he had the map.
And that internal report, just as important. It wasn't just a picture, it was the instruction manual. As Franklin's biographer Brenda Maddox put it, it was as valuable as an enemy's codebook. From that report, Watson and Crick were able to confirm that the two strands of the DNA helix run in opposite directions, a vital piece of the puzzle that Franklin was already well on her way to figuring out.
So the big question is, why didn't Franklin make the final leap herself? Well, it really came down to a huge difference in their scientific styles. Franklin was meticulous, a perfectionist. She believed you had to gather overwhelming evidence before you made a big claim. She was actually focused on a different, more complex form of DNA at the time, and had set Photo 51 aside for later. Watson and Crick, they saw the answer and they just ran with it.
So just weeks after seeing her data, Watson and Crick published their famous paper in the journal Nature, and the world was never the same. But what happened to Rosalind Franklin? Well, the aftermath is where her story just becomes heartbreaking.
In 1958, only 5 years after her photograph literally changed science forever, Rosalind Franklin died of ovarian cancer. She was just 37 years old. It's thought her death was possibly linked to her years of work and constant exposure to X-rays.
4 years after she died in 1962, Watson, Crick, and Maurice Wilkins were all awarded the Nobel Prize for the discovery. But there's a rule. The Nobel is never awarded posthumously, meaning it can't be given to someone who has passed away. So Rosalind Franklin wasn't and couldn't be included.
For years, that was pretty much it. But then, in 1968, James Watson published his famous book, The Double Helix. And in it, he just comes right out and says it. They used her data, and no one, including her, knew about it. And notice that condescending nickname he used for her throughout the book, Rosie.
And this was part of a clear pattern. Wilkins dismissively called her our Dark Lady in a letter. In their groundbreaking 1953 paper, her world-changing data was reduced to a little footnote-like acknowledgement. And when they stood on stage in Stockholm to accept the highest honor in science, neither Watson nor Crick even said her name.
But you know, the truth has a funny way of coming out eventually. Thanks to historians, biographers, and other scientists who knew the real story, there's been this slow, steady movement to put Rosalind Franklin back where she belongs, as a key player in one of the most important discoveries ever. Her name is finally getting the recognition it always deserved.
And her story just leaves you with this really big question. Rosalind Franklin's absolutely essential contribution was almost erased from history. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? How many other great discoveries